I'm Big Don Luca, smoke you like my hookah. Pump fake right, then I step back in illusion. That's a boss move maneuver, billionaire entrepreneur. Mark Cuban on the viewer, put you rookies on a skewer. I stay shitting on you boys like I came up from the sewer. Used to have a lot of dollars, now I got a lot fewer. What you saying to me? I hope you save it for me. I'm about to kill the game, and I put it in my testimony.
Hi, welcome to the Mainstream Mavs podcast. This is your host, Will. I'm joined here by my co-host, Jaren.
What is up, guys?
And today, guys, we are back for our draft profile series, continuing, of course. We're almost done here, but today we are going to be getting into one of the more highly touted prospects in terms of centers in this draft, maybe only outside of Victor Wembanyama, and that's going to be Dereck Lively the second. I guess that's even if you consider Wembanyama a center, though, which that's more just to each his own in terms of your classification. It's positionless basketball. It's 2023. But nonetheless, here with Dereck Lively the second, this has obviously been a guy that's been coveted in that 10 to 15 range in the draft. He started off a couple months ago, kind of in that 20 to 30 range, a late first rounder. And, especially with the Mavericks need for a center, I think that's bolstered his position on a lot of draft boards. I believe that he worked out for the team. 7'1", 230 pounds. Last time I checked, I believe it's like a 7'4" wingspan, 7'6" wingspan. It's not quite as long as James Najee's, who is projected at the end of the first round. He was a 7'7" wingspan. Who's been working out with Serge Ibaka, if you guys have seen any of those videos circulating around on the web. But I mean, Dereck Lively, definitely one of the more uber athletic, rim running, shot blocking guys in this class. Definitely going to be the first tried and true big men to come off the board. Has the ability to add the three ball, but that's definitely not a finished product. But at some point in his career, that could definitely shift his trajectory in terms of his potential, and just how good he's able to become one day. But of course, with Lively, there are a plethora of concerns just due to there being a lot better all around prospects kind of in that tier. But would the Mavericks draft more positionally, or are they gonna draft more for the best all around guy, right? Are they gonna draft for need, or are they going to just try and get the best overall talent in hopes of maybe swinging it in a trade? Or I don't know if that's the new GM and front office's policy, is just to take best available. That's obviously what they did last year by trading up to get Jaden Hardy at pick number 7 in the second round. But of course, that won't be the case year to year. It's just of course, situation dependent. That was a second round. But Dereck Lively is second. He obviously has been a pretty, highly talked about name. He's been tossed around quite a bit of draft heads in terms of his ability to, potentially land in that range that the Mavericks may either be selecting in or trading back in, because I don't know if you guys have been paying attention. We'll obviously have more podcasts coming out about this, tonight and over the next day or so. But the Mavericks, obviously, their pick is in the hot seat. I think that kind of goes without saying. It has been, to an effect since, on draft lottery, we found out that they were going to keep their pick. The possibility of a trade, I think, was still the overarching, more, promising sort of route to accrue talent at the end of the day. But that's not to say that the Mavericks can't draft somebody and still be wildly successful with it, especially if they trade back. And, in this instance with Lively, they may have the luxury to do both. Jaren, before we actually get into the podcast here, talk about what it means for the Mavericks to have a guy in this sort of tentative, maybe like 10 to 17 range that they could still have the flexibility to get if they trade back a little.
Yeah, so with Dereck Lively, like, he's more of a projected. I would say 15 to 20 is probably his safe zone. I think he's probably going to go there without a doubt. Now, in a lot of mock drafts, a lot of top name guys have him going number 10, and of course to Dallas. I think that's a little bit of a stretch personally, and that's why I think the Mavericks are kind of looking to trade back. If you've seen any sort of trade back scenarios that have popped up over the last few days, it's always, with the number 15 pick, more recently with the number 16 pick in the Utah Jazz. But yeah, I think that we could see a lot of different scenarios where the Mavericks do trade back and likely do select Derek Lively with either the 15th or, whatever pick they do get, as long as he's still available, of course. He's of course going to, I think, at day one, a shot blocking ability that nobody on this team has. JaVale McGee, he has all the poise that he's had, and his, success throughout his career has, ultimately been either rim running or shot blocking. But with Derek Lively, it's going to automatically come up to he's going to be the best shot blocker on this team. He averaged 2.4 blocks at Duke, and I only think in a 15-minute span, I think he averaged like 15 minutes per game. You can take that with a grain of salt too. But, I think defensively, he's going to round up a lot of things. I think there's going to be, of course, adjustments there, on the defensive end, because that is really his sort of upside. But, even still, I think his shot blocking alone is going to improve this defense pretty dramatically day one.
Yeah, no, most definitely. And I think one of the more intriguing aspects of Derek Lively was the fact that, he didn't play as much as some of these other prospects. His per 36 minutes numbers are really off the charts. So, seeing how he would handle the NBA level where it's, a little more fast paced, probably, I'm sure his defense may get hindered at the next level, just as it kind of does with any prospect to an extent. But, just the simple fact that he hasn't really got the opportunity to, play too many stretches of large amounts of games at Duke has me intrigued to see, if we could see his game maybe be a little bit more curated to the NBA game, that I think features a lot more, sort of 5 out or one guy in the paint sets, compared to college basketball. I wouldn't say took as drastic of a modernization as the NBA in recent years. It definitely still, it has become a modernized game. I think basketball's evolved a lot, over the course of the last few years. But it definitely doesn't feature as, as much 3-point shooting. Who knows? I mean, the spacing, one center in the painted area in the dunker spot, whatever, might honestly be a sort of blessing in disguise for Derek Lively. There's a lot of intriguing stuff to get into with this guy, and we'll be getting into all of it here today. But before we do that, here's an ad from our sponsor, Spotify for Podcasters. All right, Jaren. So starting with the defensive side of the ball and just rebounding wise, where the Mavericks struggled most prominently, really all throughout last season, especially after the Kyrie Irving trade, once Dorian Finney-Smith was handed over to the Brooklyn Nets. They simply just had a clear lack of stopgap measures for anything on the perimeter as well as everything in the interior. It was definitely one of the sort of sadder defensive ends to a season that I think a lot of us have seen in recent history, sort of encapsulated by those 2 Hornets losses at the end of the season that, had everybody splitting hairs, and that's essentially what kind of prompted the Tank Brigade. And, here we are with the number 10 pick. How could Derek Lively address some of those, interior defensive woes for the Mavericks? What is he good at? What is he not, from a defensive perspective?
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned in the intro, day one, I think he's going to make a clear noise on that sort of shot blocking sort of thing. Not just that, but I think he's a good rotational defender. He's a really good help side defender. His speed, I think, is going to be kind of easy to beat at the NBA level, but he has enough size to where, if he does get beat, he can still make a shot really difficult, especially with some of those smaller guards because of his length. He has a 7'7" wingspan. And for him to do that, I think, a lot of his sort of recovery blocks were just off of him getting beat off of either hezzies or just dribble blow-bys. But oftentimes he was able to block those shots because of his length, as I said. And not just that, but he's a really good sort of IQ defender in the sense that and what a big needs to be. I'm not saying he's going to affect the perimeter as much as like a wing would or anything like that, but I think that he can affect the perimeter in certain ways, whether it's a pick and roll coverage or even just sort of hovering outside a little bit. he's definitely a guy that you stick down low and you stick him on a 5 and you expect him to pretty much stay there. You don't really expect him to rotate anywhere or make any off ball rotations or anything like that. But he's definitely a guy that's capable of doing that. I think it's something that he'll need to work on throughout probably his whole entire, rookie year and years up into development. But I think he's a great defender. He has a good base. As I said, a really good vertical defender. And the pick and roll coverage, I think, is something that's a little underrated. He was able to pick up either the ball handler, or even, sort of hedge and recover on the big, and did a very successful job at that. And, I think him switching on the ball handler, oftentimes is whenever you saw him get initially beat. And as I said before, a lot of his blocks were recovery blocks. He's a very good vertical defender. As I said, he has a very good base, which, is going to help him on that shot blocking. I think the only thing, negative wise that's going to really hurt him is his size. I think, going up against the Jokic's or Embiid's, some of those stronger sort of 5s in this league, or even 4s for that matter, they're going to easily, kind of bully their way inside, at least, with Wembanyama. I'm trying not to like draw any comparisons here. But with Wembanyama, he's so tall and so long that like he can make those sort of adjustments enough to sort of, I guess alleviate his sort of lack of strength. With Lively, I think he's just small enough, small for 7'1". He's just small enough that, getting bullied is probably going to be a real factor. At least year one. I don't think he can put that much muscle on. I know he's drawn some comparisons to Tyson Chandler, and guys like that. But to me, I think Tyson Chandler, at least sort of in his latter years of his career, he was definitely more of a beefier sort of center. I just don't think Derek Lively is that quite yet. Not saying he can't work up into that. But at least as of right now, I think that's probably going to be the thing that holds him back the most, especially on the defensive side. And also just sort of his lack of mobility. He's sort of not, immobile, but he's sort of clunky, a little slow footed. The usual kind of big, doesn't know their size yet, sort of center kind of, I guess, problems that they've had. Not saying that those aren't things that you can work on, because you definitely can. And especially over a rookie season, I expect him to work on those things and get a lot better. But as far as negatives go, I think his size is going to severely sort of hurt him, especially because he'll be a primary target for those Embiids or for those Jokic's. And sort of just his lack of mobility. I think, if he is going to get switched onto, say, a perimeter guy, or even a guy with some ball handling moves, it's going to be very difficult for him to stick one-on-one. And, at the NBA level, there's going to be a lot more shifty sort of guards. There's going to be, wings, stretch forwards. Like there's all of these different things that at the college level, there just isn't enough of, to where you have to get, like sort of scheme for. So I think it's going to be a sort of a big adjustment for him, but I think his shot blocking and his length will definitely benefit him. And as I said before, day one, this guy's going to come in, and I think he's going to make a real difference for the Mavericks.
Yeah, if the Mavericks were to draft him, he definitely would in some capacity. But just in regards to the whole athleticism spill that you kind of went on there, I don't think that he's a bad athlete by any means. But to your point, I do think that some of that sort of absorption of his size, I guess he just really hasn't grasped. He's obviously kind of grown into his shoes too fast, or whatever. And he does look a little clunky, and his agility, has a tendency to, not be the best in terms of how reactionary he is and things of that nature. And that's something that, he'll have to get used with time. There's not too many, highly mobile 7-footers for a reason. So if he's able, at 7'1" to get a little bit more mobile, it'll only bolster his ability to guard in the perimeter, as well as what he can do offensively. But as of right now, I wouldn't say that it's a huge limiting factor because of, just how big he is and how much, he can jump high for his size. He is pretty explosive. He has really hard finishes. He has a quick second jump. So, I mean, he has a lot of these intangibles that you look for in a rim running big. It's just maybe the reaction time, the agility, things of that nature. Just, being a little bit more savvy from that perspective, I think could really, change how, his trajectory at the end of the day. But in terms of his defense, this is still one of the best rim protectors in the draft, if, only maybe second to Wembanyama, of course. And, he does a variety of different things good, right? This is a guy that you can kind of, stick and camp in the dunker spot. And if you need him to rotate over as the low man on a weak side rotation, from when somebody gets beat, he's going to be a guy that can come through as a help defender. He's excellent at that. Just using his frame, staying vertical. He does a really good job at staying vertical. And that's something that a lot of rookie centers struggle with. Now, could he experience woes at the NBA level when guys have a lot, they have a lot more array of moves to try and get your hands down. He could experience some woes in that department, but I do think that overall that's going to be a strong suit for him. If you're playing any sort of, zone scheme, he while I did talk about his, lateral quickness and agility, essentially maybe needing to improve a little bit. He, like I said, he's a decent athlete. So if he's able to react, he'll get a good read on the ball. And he can rotate great positionally. And if somebody's coming downhill at him, regardless of scheme, whether teams are playing man or zone, he's poised to be able to, anchor down and, help somebody coming directly at him. He's not a guy that's going to shy away from contact, at least on defense. And that's definitely something that's admirable. He is decent in his pick and roll coverage, as Jaren talked about. I do think that may be a drawing point at the next level that we're really going to need to put a microscope under, because pick and roll defense at the NBA level is just a lot harder. Guys are a lot more poised in terms of knowing the exact right passes to make, knowing their personnel a lot better. Guys have been playing a lot longer together in some cases. So that may be a little bit of adjustment because of, the slower reaction times, as well as the length that I think a lot of these NBA offenses are, going to sort of provide to him, or maybe not provide's a good word, because they're going to try to establish their dominance on him. But, a lot of these guys, for example, like Giannis, for instance, coming down on him in the pick and roll, if you're forced to tag him as the roller, and you have him in a short roll scenario. Derek Lively's not one of, he's not a Robert Williams yet. He's not earned that sort of title where I just have the utmost confidence that he can at least put up a fight against some of these top tier guys. He's gonna have to get a little bit better at, specifically in switch scenarios, and that's going to be the biggest adjustment. But as well as like tagging the roller. Especially I think on alley oops and stuff like that, he could maybe do a little bit better in that regard. When he's defending, of course, but he does have a great wingspan at 7'7", almost an 8 foot standing, or I'm tripping, almost a 9 foot standing reach. And he can get out on closeouts sometimes. But that switchability, of course, is going to hinder him in some instances, because his immobility, is going to haunt him when he gets blown by, at the level of the screen, knowing exactly, should he hedge and recover? Is he going to have the wherewithal or the ability to even cover that much ground? Or is it a ball handler that he feels confident within himself that, he's going to be able to stick with? And, some of that comes down to coaching, of course, too, in terms of how a team's playing that. But I do think some of, anything essentially dealing with lateral mobility, I do think Derek Lively may have a tough time adjusting to, just based on, historical data. A lot of rookie centers having to really master that, as well as, just kind of how he projected at Duke last year. An uber athletic, rim running 5, but, in terms of, the sort of slow footedness, that's going to be something that he can improve, right? He's a pretty decent rebounder, but, we didn't have the most extreme sample size with him only playing about 20 minutes a game to really get a full grasp of that. So at the NBA level, a lot more shots going up, 48-minute game compared to 40, you're playing quarters, a lot more threes. That's going to be interesting to see how that translates. I do think he could do a better job at boxing out so much. He does have a sort of over reliance on his length, and his size to box out at the NBA level. that may not be as applicable, especially as long and aggressive as guys are. So that's going to be something he kind of needs to hone in on. But, in terms of Mavericks fans always coveting, that sort of rim protector that we've been looking for. Mark Stein acts, just recently, I believe, either on a podcast or within his Substack, said that the Mavericks are looking to completely sort of revitalize, reshape their center rotation this offseason. And if you want to get that process sort of segued, selecting Derek Lively in this draft, at least from, a defensive perspective and a rim running perspective, could definitely do that. He's a guy that I think can come in and still provide a decent, that he'll have his rookie woes, but he'll still be, a really strong rim protector. He'll be a really good rim runner, and we'll get into a little more of his offense here in a second, but he'll still be a really good rim runner. He could do that if that's what you're looking for as a Mavericks fan, that coveted rim protector that honestly we've been looking for really years on end, dating back to when Porzingis was on the team, and now he's not. He ended up not really necessarily being able to do that. So, adding size against some of these bigger NBA centers is definitely going to help, like Jaren said, but he's definitely not the most frail guy in the world. He's 230. Tyson Chandler coming into the league was about 235, 240. So he's not too far off. He's not like skinny by any means. Oh, bad voice, Greg. He's not skinny by any means, but he definitely could, add a little bit muscle to counteract some of the, bigger, offensive centers in this league, because, obviously the most dynamic threat from that perspective, like you look at Jokic, who just won the title. Now, there's not a lot of these sort of gaudy centers that he's going to have to guard one-on-one like Embiid or Jokic. He will be kind of tit for tat with a lot of rim runners and shot blockers, or guys that are going to, stretch fives, things like that. But, when he does have to face off against some of these all-star centers, he's really going to have to anchor down and put his post defense as well as his lateral quickness on full display, because, size alone won't be able to just get the job done against them specifically, because, contrary to maybe other guys in the league, he's definitely not going to be able to use just purely his length and his verticality to be able to stop these guys on defense. So, this is obviously a prospect with a lot of questions, but he definitely has some of the most upside because of the intangibles and the size and the length compared to any of the guys that we've covered. He could be the center of the future for the Mavericks. And, he could even add muscle over the offseason. Like, guys make jumps literally from their, sophomore or freshman year in college just to the NBA over the summer working out. It's a nonstop sort of rotation, even if we don't see it. So, I don't know exactly how long he would take to fully develop, but, if I had to tentatively project, maybe a couple years, but, I think he still could help, I'm pretty confident in the fact that he could still come in and help the Mavericks day one in some sort of capacity, probably in a starting role. And even if not that, I think he could sort of be vetted up to that throughout the course of the season, and then he could continue to improve. So this is definitely one of the more higher coveted guys that we've looked at in terms of my interest in him and the Mavericks' interest in selecting him. Jaren, what do you think he could add to the Mavericks from an offensive perspective, barring, kind of what we've already talked about with some of the rim running? He is a lot more limited, I think, in this capacity, and it's definitely not as good as his defense, if that makes any sense. So what is he adding to the Mavericks offense if he comes here?
Yeah, I think his offense, as you said, is much more limited compared to his defense. It's much more of a, if you get it, cool. If you don't, that's all right. There's three things that I want to highlight more so than anything. His dunks, I think he was 96.7% on his dunk attempts. And I know it's like, okay, well, he's at the rim. He should make those. I believe a league average is like 91 or 90%, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit higher. Or I guess I just said that, but I think he's a pretty solid finisher around the rim. And not just that, but he has some playmaking upside and also some shooting upside. I know he shot 15.7% from three from Duke, which doesn't sound good, but I think as the season progressed, he definitely shot a little bit better. I think he worked up to like 32% for the last like 8 games or something like that. And on top of that, he has pretty solid mechanics for a 7-footer in terms of shooting. There wasn't much of a sample size to go off of. And again, I don't really know if Jason Kidd, assuming we do draft him, is going to want him to sort of stretch the floor. But he does have that ability to either bail out at the end of a shot clock, or, potentially, if you really wanted to, you could probably draw up a play, throw him in the corner. Again, that's something that I don't think is going to happen day one. This is going to be something that he has to develop over a career. But that, and as I said, his playmaking, he's got some pretty solid playmaking upside. He was a really solid, not good, not bad, sort of offensive rebounder at the college level. I think one of the things that, once we do talk about his improvements, was he does pass a little bit too much out of those sort of offensive rebound scenarios. But also one of the positives is he finds open shooters on those sort of scenarios. There's always going to be someone around the perimeter that's open, and he's always, the guy to find that. Not just that, but he with his height, he's easily able to find cutters in a post position, backdoor cutters, whoever it may be. He's shown some upside there. His rim running, I don't really know a whole lot about that. I think, for what he's going to be doing at the pro level, I think he's going to for sure have to develop a rim running sort of ability similar to maybe not Jared Allen, because he's one of the best in the league at that. But I think he's going to have some sort of cognitive ability to, run the pick and roll through a system. And, especially in the Mavericks, he's going to have to get used to that. And he's going to have to get pretty good at that if he wants to start. I think offensively, those are the things that, kind of stand out positively. Sort of a negative improvement sort of area is he's just not really assertive. His offensive rebound was kind of spotty. It wasn't, too aggressive on that end. He's sort of, kind of, I guess, hones in his aggressiveness on defense. If anything, he's sort of, his offensive end is his sort of rest time. His defensive end is where he goes full balls to the wall. That's kind of what we saw throughout his college. I think it was 37 games that he played. But yeah, I think that there's definitely some improvements to be made there. Just more of a consistency. If anything needs to develop, probably a mid-range type game, because again, he is kind of a smaller guy. Not saying he can't develop those muscles. He's kind of a smaller figure wise, he's kind of a smaller, sort of slower footed 7-footer. I think if he could work on a little bit of a mid-range, or at least like a teardrop sort of thing, that would improve his game a lot. Maybe not like rely on that as much as like DeAndre Ayton or anything like that, but I think if he could develop some sort of fadeaway or some sort of mid-range game, that would really benefit his offensive, sort of production. Granted, he did score, I think he averaged 5.5 points in a 20-minute span, which is honestly pretty good at the collegiate level. I think if he could, kind of average that 8 to 10 range, that he'd probably be honestly a starter at that level. But yeah, as far as offense goes, it's much more of a raw sort of, I guess, sample size. Like there's really not a whole lot to go off of. And that's why I'm kind of like, trying to predict the future almost, but I'm not. Because we do have a sample size there in a sense, but at the pro level, he's going to be asked to do different things. And those are simple things that we haven't seen enough of. But I think the rim running and for sure the playmaking are going to be something that we have to see probably a little bit more of to get a full grasp on it. But I think from an offensive sort of mind, it does sort of intrigue you.
Yeah, no, I mean, he was a pretty dynamic passer out of the short roll, which is really intriguing. When he'd get double in those scenarios, they'd bring a help side defender. He uses his frame well to be able to swing some passes the other way, and that's one of the more very intriguing aspects, because you don't see a lot of 7-footers that are cognizant enough to be able to do that on a nightly basis. And of course, that swing factor in terms of how good could he get is going to be the playmaking and the short rolls as well as the 3-ball. If those things can really come to a premium for him at some point in his career, I mean, this could be we could be looking at a redraft in a few years and being like, what the heck were we doing here, right? For some of these NBA teams. But some of the mistakes and some of the lapses that he has both offensively and defensively are just fairly concerning, and they're really easy to discern on the court. It doesn't take a genius to see exactly what he's doing wrong. On a lot of his screens, he doesn't set hard screens. He tends to slip too much. Kind of just will come up to the level of the screen and give a little half-second sort of screen, barely get set, and then go. Usually doesn't make contact. There weren't really even much possessions where he did. So I mean, that's going to be a huge thing to change, because at the NBA level, it's paramount that you can set good screens. look no further than the Miami Heat's run with Bam Adebayo this past year. I mean, there's not much more I need to say. If you are a basketball head and you watch enough, the Bam's ability to screen at the nail, set screens for shooters, set screens at the point of attack for ball handlers, and using that to sort of feed off that and get to the rim. Not necessarily even looking for his own offense, but being able to just sort of walk into 18 to 20 points because of his abilities to create space for himself and others with the screens. This is not a guy that's going to be able to do that unless he changes, but I do have faith that he can change. He's a big ass dude, and he's going to need to do that throughout the course of his NBA career. He's going to get kicked to the curb at some point. If the athleticism can't win over, that's just going to be something he's going to need to work on consistently. A lot of this stuff is, just an over reliance on, oh man, I'm Derek Lively the second. I'm so big. I have a 7'7" wingspan. I can block anything. I don't need to go all the way out on this closeout. I don't need to set screen this hard. That sort of over reliance on his size is something that he can't. That's not going to be a plug and play at the NBA level, right? This is going to be a guy that needs to get the intangibles down. He needs to get that work ethic down. I'm not saying he's not a hard worker or anything like that. I haven't dug deep enough into his time at Duke or, high school or anything like that. But, in high school, he was the number 2 prospect in the class of 2022. Did that maybe have a hindrance to an extent on how he played at the college level, just given maybe that, he viewed himself on a higher echelon, felt like he didn't have to work as hard. I don't know. I mean, that definitely could be something, but I think that he has some good basketball intangibles, and the shot and the stuff in the short roll is really intriguing. He needs to add a lot more of an offensive bag. There were a couple times that he was able to kind of seal defenders and, kind of like KP used to do, if you guys remember, where he kind of just rotates over, is able to, whether it be just, from a screen, down low or something like that, he's able to get good position and kind of seal guys off for a dunk. He's really explosive towards the rim, but a lot of the time, if it's a post-up scenario, he's not necessarily the guy that you want to throw the ball to on the low block. He can be okay and somewhat maybe a little bit more dynamic in the mid post, where he's able to kind of see over guys and facilitate a little bit better. But in the low post, this is a guy that he doesn't have much of an offensive bag. He doesn't really have a hook shot to his name. He doesn't, he needs to still work on his drop step, his sort of array of finishes, his finishing through contact, despite how big he is. So, I mean, those are all going to be huge drawing points for his offensive game. He's still extremely raw on that end. Good news for the Mavericks is they really don't need him to do too much of that. If he could set good, if he can just get good rebounds, set good screens, play in the dunker spot on offense, rim roll when he's asked to, as well as, be able to, be a dynamic rim protector, they're going to be okay. If he can just hit on the things and, apply that effort where it's necessary, once he comes into the league, it's going to be a guy that, can plug and play as a starting center. But if he even experiences lapses in maybe one or two of these areas where we thought he was going to be strong in coming into the NBA, but is not as good, because in college he could kind of get away with maybe not setting a screen, or he could get away with, making a lackadaisical sort of rotation onto a smaller defender, and didn't close out or whatever, right? Those things may not be as applicable in college. So that, seeing how that all comes together and seeing how, his game comes together holistically, as well as what he can add, is going to be, the big swing factors for this guy. This guy is definitely one of the more volatile prospects that I think we've covered. But that being said, just because of the upside, because of how badly the Mavericks need a rim protector, if he's there at 10, you at least definitely have to consider it. And, much less if he's there at 15, once the Mavericks have already traded back, if they wish to do that, or, 16, something like that. He's got to be one of the higher guys on the draft board for the Mavericks, even though I definitely would probably be a little bit more keen to a lot of other guys' names that we've covered, just because of the role that he would have to play on the Mavericks, and how drastic of a need that is comparable to some of these other guys. I definitely think that he'd be worth consideration. And I'm in the camp that the Mavericks need a wide array of sort of wing defenders before they even need a rim protector too, because I know that that's been kind of a talking point between fans. I earnestly think that that's the solution to all of this. The Mavericks do need a rim protector or a center that can, switch positionally, be able to guard out on the perimeter, as well as play some good individual one-on-one defenses on bigs down low, kind of like a Kevon Looney. Like they could either use that or, just a really good tried and true, weak side help protecting rim protector, right? But are they going to be able to get that through free agency or the offseason, or trades, right? Are they going to be able to get that? Or is that outlet, going to be something that they're only able to accrue from the draft? I think that they have to consider that heavily when taking this pick into discussion, right? Because, there's not a lot of 7-footers floating around up available for grabs that are going to be able to come in and, solve the shot blocking issues, the rebounding issues that, don't have some sort of debate as to, the validity of the player. There's like a lot of 7-footers in this league that, just don't try enough, or everybody's always, being, oh, they could do this and this better. There's not just a lot of like tried and true good centers in today's NBA. So, and when I say true centers, I kind of mean guys that play the traditional 5 in a sense where they're a rim runner or, they're a pure post and, they're not really shooting much. They're not outside the painted area, and they're strictly a rim protector on offense, right? Or on defense. And then, Derek Lively, the addition of a 3-ball is extremely intriguing, but that's probably not going to be a day one plug and play on a consistent basis, at least. So, I think that he could definitely be a starting caliber 5 for the Mavericks, but a lot of these swing factors are going to have to go his way, or, I could maybe see him fizzling out for a little bit until the Mavericks are able to make the right adjustment and, vet him up to speed. But seeing how they treat the big man rotation, JaVale McGee's mentorship, if he stays in all this, I'm sure all those factors, the veteran mentorship, working with the coaching staff day in and day out, getting more laterally quick, those could all be things that could really, bolster this prospect.
Yeah, absolutely. There's, I guess, just like a rawness to his character alone. Going as high as he possibly could. There's a very high bust potential, especially for what the Mavericks do need out of him. But again, the upside is there. I think that, granted, this is not my comparison, and I don't think that he will ever be at this level, but he has drawn some ESPN comparisons to Anthony Davis, and I don't think he has that offensive bag. But he has drawn those sort of comparisons. So I think, if everything does pan out, you could have a career half similar to that. But there's a lot of things that have to hit. And I think that he has to be in a great system that, sort of doesn't work around him. But I guess he can work within, or he can sort of balance within that system. And I think the Mavericks probably have that out of any lottery team. I think that they probably have that the most. At least a winning lottery team. So yeah, I think that there's some upside there, as we said, and there's definitely some high bust potential. I think once we get into that sort of 1 out of 10 category that we always get into, it's gonna kind of be fun. It's gonna kind of be a good talking point.
No, yeah, most definitely. And in terms of Derek Lively, Jaren, you kind of already kind of mentioned his ceiling as a player. I think this guy's ceiling is through the roof. If he could hone in on his offensive bag whatsoever, if he can, add a drop step to his game, even get a consistent 3, you could be looking at a Miles Turner type of guy down the road if he was able to add a consistent 3. Maybe the whole playmaking in the short roll is really intriguing. I don't know exactly how that would pan out for him in the long run if he's able to expand upon that, maybe add a little bit of a dribbling aspect to his game, but it's really volatile. I'd say if just everything were to go right and he somehow got better at everything, he could be like Anthony Davis, kind of like those ESPN tentative, projections kind of listed him as. But I think that's in the 0.01 kind of percent of probability. But could he be a Miles Turner if he hit at the end of the day? Absolutely, I would say. You can go ahead and hash out the floor if you want to, since I did the ceiling.
Yeah, I think that a floor, honestly, a good guy, probably Mo Brown. I mean, someone who in and out of rotations, can't really get a fingerprint on the league. Has potential, always probably has had potential. But again, like I said, just can't find a sort of role within the league, is, always sort of that odd man out. Whether it's with Dallas or LA, whoever it is. I mean, he's always had that sort of weird kind of, I guess, role on that team. So I could definitely see that being Derek Lively's career at the very worst. Just kind of a bench shot blocker who sort of just fizzled out in a few years. I mean, a guy who, doesn't really unlock anything other than his shot blocking ability. Which, it is scary because that's kind of what we did see in college. But again, I think he's 19 years old, a younger 19-year-old guy. I think he'll be like not even 19 and a half. I think he'll be like a quarter by the time draft, I guess in 4 days. So yeah, I think there's definitely some upside there with his age and all that, but as I said, at the very worst, I think he's kind of a guy that just can't really find a role within the league. Not saying he's going to be outside of the league within 2 or 3 years, not saying that. But there definitely could be a very realistic possibility that his career is less than 6 to 5 years in the NBA.
Yeah, if this is a guy where his immobility hinders him, he never develops a shot. He doesn't really expand upon his offensive game. And the rim running isn't as good as we maybe thought because he doesn't set hard enough screens at the NBA level. Just has some trouble putting on size. I mean, yeah, he could easily fizzle out and be out of the league in a handful of years, right? But it's all going to be dependent on how hard he works on the small intricacies of the game. That's going to make or break this guy. And it's crazy, because he has to work on that, and he has some of the best physical tools in the draft. If he was any of these other guys with some of their skill sets, that's when you get number one overall pick type of guys like Victor Wembanyama. But that just shows you how rare adding those sort of intangibles is at that size. So but this is definitely a pretty impressive prospect despite all the knocks that we gave him. It just depends on a variety of swing factors that are all going to be conducive to how he's able to improve upon them throughout his NBA career, and he definitely can improve upon them. I'm not trying to negate the fact or trying to downplay his ability to improve. I mean, he's very raw, but he has all the athletic tools in the world. Very very wrong. Oh my goodness, I am on a tangent with mismatching words right now and syllables. Very young and very raw. But if things do come into fruition for him, he could be Tyson Chandler for sure. As a lot of Mavericks fans are sort of hoping, after they've seen a lot of those comparisons going around online. But yeah, now we'll go ahead and denote his boomer bust rating, I guess. This is going to be based out of 10 for those of you guys who haven't listened to one of our draft profiles before. This is essentially the whole premise of this is that it's based on the prospect's volatility. It's not like one side is on the low end, he's gonna boom, so it'd be a 1, or on the high end he would bust, so it'd be a 10. No, it's like strictly based on like how likely they are to boom or bust, or are they more of a safe pick? We're essentially rating the volatility of the prospect out of 10, right? For Derek Lively, I'd say he's our first 10, Jaren. I don't really have, I feel like this whole last 30-minute tangent that I've been on can essentially be my prerequisite for that, can essentially be my explanation. He could literally, be a multiple time All-Star, one of the best shot blockers in the league, defensive player of the year candidate, perpetually, or he could fizzle out and not be anything. But I mean, all the intangibles are there. So that's what I'm going to go. I'm going to go with the 10.
Yeah, I was going to go more, probably 8.5 to 8 range, just because I do agree with you. I think he can be at his very best a multi-time All-Star, defensive player of the year, leader in shot blocks, all of that. I think he could be that. At the worst, we mentioned it, a guy who fizzles out, isn't, in an NBA uniform within, 5 years or so. And I think the reason why I'm at 8.5 and not a 10 like you are is because I do think that there is a world where he could come off a bench, sort of similar to Mitchell Robinson earlier in his career. Even now, I guess, kind of, coming off the bench, and still produces a lot, within a short minute span. I think that he could potentially do that. And so that's why I kind of sit with that 8.5, sort of 8 range.
No, yeah, I completely understand your take on that. Me saying that Derek Lively the second could be at, both ends of the totem pole in terms of how, extreme his career ends up projecting is not me saying that that's what's going to happen. I'm just saying that definitely, the trajectory that's on, he could go either way, but he could definitely fizzle out and be somewhere in the middle. I'm just saying I do think he has some of the more higher volatility in this draft, but this has been the draft profile for Derek Lively the second. Honestly, probably, as much as I knocked him throughout this podcast, probably who I'd select
Yeah, it probably would
at
be.
10 if all the original guys are off the board. And by original guys, I mean I'm just going to go ahead and list the top 8. I think the sort of consensus top 8 that I don't think I could pass up on if I'm the Mavericks at 10, unless a really good trade is lined up. And that's going to be obviously Wembanyama, Scoot Henderson, Brandon Miller, both of the Thompson twins. I would throw Jarvis Walker in there, Taylor Hendricks, Cam Whitmore, Anthony Black. I think if any of those 8 are on the board at 10, you got to at least give it consideration, or have a really good trade lined up on the table. I'd say Derek Lively is definitely a tier out of that for me, but he's a guy that fits the need the most, and I would love the selection, especially if they trade back for him. Preferably I would hope that they could still get him and trade back for them and get more assets, but I mean, we'll see. But he's definitely one of the more coveted guys in this draft for the Mavericks because he's a rim protector. But yeah, with that being said, we'll go ahead and catch you guys in the next one. This has been Will with the Mainstream Mavs podcast. Make sure to get at us on Twitter at Mainstream214. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube, the Mainstream Mavs podcast. Comment down below, where do you think Derek Lively II is going to land on draft night? We're going to be live streaming the draft on YouTube. We'll be live hours before the draft, so make sure to stay tuned for the Mainstream Mavs podcast on YouTube. Go ahead and subscribe to us. We'd really appreciate that. Make sure to get at us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're on almost any listening platform. Give us a 5-star review. Follow us, turn on post notifications for our podcast when they come out. We would really appreciate that if you guys have listened this far in the podcast and you really do enjoy our stuff. With that being said, this has been Will and Jaren with the Mainstream Mavs podcast, and we will catch you guys later tonight. We got way more podcasts coming out before the draft.